for the win. Bang!
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second episode of Buzzer Beater with my co-host, Adesh. Adesh, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good, man. Sunday, end of the week, had my first real college week this week and a great game last night. So, yeah, looking forward to another podcast.
Oh, yeah, same. Speaking of the game last night, I'm quite disappointed. As someone who fell in love with basketball watching the Celtics franchise, I'm quite disappointed with the loss yesterday. We'll be digging deep into that later. But Adesh, you want to start us off for this week?
Yeah, sure. As always, since with this podcast, we want to first, since we're doing this like a weekly podcast, we want to start discussing the big games this week. There were two big games we're going to talking about. Both involved Los Angeles Lakers. The first one is the Wednesday loss to the Philadelphia 76ers. Of course, this game was very hyped as both the Lakers and Sixers at the time were the number one seed in their division, in their respective conferences. Lakers, coming off their championship in Orlando, they've been doing pretty well so far. I mean, I think they've only lost 3 games up to that point. The Sixers, they're pretty much similar too. They've been having a really, much better season compared to their year's failures. Joel Embiid and LeBron James are both playing like MVP candidates. What are your thoughts about the game, man?
So I think this showed like the weakness in the Lakers. I think their mentality definitely needs to change. Like I get they won the championship and all, but I honestly think the Lakers are in the phase where they think it's like the off season or where they think it's the preseason. I honestly think they should start to wake up and realize that they're favorites to win the championship this year. And they shouldn't be losing to the teams like the 76ers. Honestly, because Ben Simmons can't shoot. The only really good player on the 76ers team is Joel Embiid. Now, if Joel Embiid came out and said that, I don't know if you saw on Twitter, but he said FIFA Ultimate Team is easier. I mean, it's harder than guarding AD. AD hasn't been playing like himself, and I honestly think the Lakers shouldn't be playing like this. Especially if they're the favorites to win the championship for next year, they shouldn't be playing like this. And for the 76ers, I think they've been improving really well. Joel Embiid's playing like an MVP candidate. I think the main change with the 76ers from last year to this year is mainly the coaching. Because we see Daryl Morey, who's a great general manager like we saw in the Houston Rockets. And then we saw Doc Rivers, who has championship experience with the 08 Celtics, and he knows what it takes to get past the first and second round and maybe even get to the finals. So that's my honest take on the 76ers-Lakers game. I think 76ers are proving to be a real threat in the East. They're the sleeper team. No one expected them to be the first seed right now. They're sleepers. They're the dark horse candidate for the finals right now.
Yeah, pretty much same kind of thoughts as well, because Philadelphia, ever since that their first round win over the Miami Heat a few years back, they've just been a very inconsistent mess. They've been able to win a lot of big games, but also lost a lot of easy games. Like last year, they beat the Lakers by like 40 on the night when LeBron passed Kobe, and then like a few weeks later lost to the Golden State Warriors, where Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green were not even playing. So they've been a very inconsistent mess. But this year, they've been playing much better. Of course, they fired Brett Brown, and they had an entire new managementship. With Daryl Morey coming over, Morey has built a pretty good squad. He was able to get rid of Al Horford and Josh Richardson, 2 big free agent signings they made last year, and they're able to get Seth Curry, Danny Green, and many other veterans and young players to help out the roster. And so far, this team is much better. Of course, Ben Simmons, he hasn't been himself recently. I mean, of course, he had the injury at the end of the bubble. He was in a lot of trade talks and apparently thought he was going to go to Houston with the James Harden deal. But, of course, Harden went to the Nets, and he's been very inconsistent overall. But in the end, right now, I mean, Simmons, we saw on Wednesday, he was very aggressive. He began, in the first quarter, he and LeBron kind of went at each other. Simmons pretty much was going through the paint, dunking every chance he got, laying it in, and pretty much, having his own way with tough Laker defense. And Embiid himself, he's probably the MVP frontrunner. He's playing really well. He pretty much dominated Marc Gasol and Anthony Davis. Of course, everyone sees Marc Gasol as the Embiid kryptonite, as he's always, made Embiid pretty useless. Of course, that Toronto-Philadelphia series a few years ago when Marc Gasol kind of pretty much took Embiid out of the entire series for most of the time. So, he was able to overcome that. And AD, of course, he has not been himself. Of course, ever since that bubble, he's been struggling in a way. It feels like he's the one in his 18th year at 36, not LeBron. But exactly, and yeah, and he's had stretches where he's had good performances, of course the one against Chicago a few nights ago where he completely dominated the Bulls. But other than that, he's just been pretty much a liability. It's been more LeBron and the other offense taking over. And also about that, a lot of some other players seem to be struggling as well. Dennis Schroeder, the key free agent acquisition that everyone thought was going to be good. Everyone said it would be a much better Rondo. He has not been himself. He's struggled a lot. He seems like he's still having his doubts of the offense and stuff. And it feels like, him being the starter might not have been a good idea. And then maybe he should ride the bench out, like where he always has been with Atlanta, with OKC, throughout that. And then there are a lot of young guards they have, like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Alex Caruso, who we'll talk about Caruso later, but they've been having some good nights in the end. But like Vogel seemed to, not give him too much minutes. And he gave Caruso at the end, but it felt like in a way it was kind of forced in that, if LA wants to win, they need to make sure they run the right rotations and have the good progress in players.
Yeah, that's what I've been saying with Dennis Schroeder, even from last week. Like, Dennis Schroeder's efficiency has gone down. He played great as a bench player in OKC. He's been averaging 19 points. He should have won Sixth Man of the Year, in my honest opinion. But his efficiency has gone down as a starter, especially on the Lakers. Like I said, their player development isn't that good. So developing D. Schroeder as a starter won't be good for the Lakers. So that's my honest opinion. Now with the Lakers and Celtics, I'm honestly very disappointed with the Celtics. I think that if they had Marcus Smart in the fourth quarter, they could have won the game. I think there are two big factors as why the Celtics lost the game in the first place. First and foremost, the Lakers flopped way too much. It's becoming very evident with Trez and LeBron flopping for every minor contact they have. It's getting ridiculous. And secondly, Marcus Smart. The 1 point loss, I feel like Marcus Smart could have tied things up and they could have won the game. That's my honest opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, about that game overall, I felt like the first quarter, Anthony Davis and Jason Tatum were both cooking. Tatum always goes off against the Lakers. As a Laker fan, it kind of annoys me, but he's a big Laker guy. He saw Kobe as a big, idol, so I can't blame him. Both were going hot, which was nice to see as a Laker fan because Davis has, been struggling. And then slowly in the second, third quarter, Boston seemed to be slowly, taking it in, but then Marcus Smart got hurt. And the LA offense began to, go at Kemba Walker, who didn't exactly do really well that game at all. And then, of course, the final sequence was, Lakers kind of threw over the ball. And then, Alex Caruso himself, he played really good defense on Jaylen Brown. I'll be honest, I think Caruso's involvement in that offense, his defensive play that game was pretty much the main reason why the Lakers came out of the victory. Because if Jaylen Brown just pretty much went straight in, he could have easily, had a Celtics lead, and Lakers could have missed it. Lakers could have lost that game and been on a 3-game losing streak. But Caruso was able to challenge Brown. Brown had to go pass it off to Walker, and Kemba Walker, he missed it, which. It's disappointing to see, him not go from the all-star starter he was last year to being pretty much more of a bench player. But that's kind of how life is in the NBA and stuff. So overall, I think the Lakers, they had a decent game. Of course, it was much better. Their effort was much better compared to what happened in the prior two losses. But there are some really big signs of weaknesses and stuff. And I think. Partially, that has to kind of do with the road trip. This road trip has consisted of games against Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Detroit, and now Boston and Cleveland, of course, on Monday. So it's been a long one. I think this team just wants to get back home. And, of course, they have Atlanta on Monday. I think that would be a good game to watch, mainly for Trae Young and against LeBron and stuff. But, yeah, I think Lakers, they do still have weaknesses, and they're kind of still in that championship hungover. But I think they'll eventually find out exactly who they are.
Yeah, that's what I honestly agree. Over the next couple of weeks or so, the Lakers don't have any hard games they're playing. The only team I see them realistically losing to is the Nuggets. And even that, I don't see them losing by more than a couple points, even if they do lose. Realistically, they should be beating the Nuggets by 10. And then for Brooklyn, it should be pretty close in the next couple of weeks. So that's my honest take on the Lakers. They need to get over this championship hangover and actually realize that they're about 20 games into the season, and 50 more games in, it's going to be the postseason. So, yeah,
Yeah, because if I remember right, I think they had played Denver, Detroit, Oklahoma City a few times, and then Denver just before their game against Brooklyn on the 18th. So they do have a very pretty light schedule for them, and while that does feel nice and stuff, but they need to make sure they can get themselves right because of course the game against the Nets, everyone's gonna be talking about it. If LA loses that game pretty badly, then I think they're going to lose they'll get a lot of hate from the media. They get a lot of hate. People will start bringing up the KD over LeBron narratives, and I don't think the team really wants to enjoy that too. So yeah.
With that being said, we're introducing a new segment into our show called Flavor of the Week. So for this week's Flavor of the Week, Adesh, what's the Flavor of the Week for this week?
Of course, this week we all know, All-Star voting has finally begun. There isn't exactly any confirmation whether or not there'll be a game or not, but there will be recognized All-Stars. So, of course, the voting has started for the top 10, the starters for the East and West. Of course, we'll be predicting who the captains will be. And then exactly who do you think will make the top 5? Now, I think many of us know 50% goes to the fan vote, 25% goes to the players and coaches, Another 25% goes to the medium themselves. So, Nanduk, who do you think is your top five in the East and West?
So for the top five, I will read out my selection. So for the West, for my front court, I have LeBron James, Nikola Jokic, Kawhi Leonard. And for my front two guards, I have Luka Doncic and Steph Curry. I think those are pretty self-explanatory. Now for the East, I have Kyrie Irving, Bradley Beal, Embiid, Kyrie Irving, Bradley Beal for my guards, and then for my front court, I have Embiid, Durant, and Giannis. Now, I think my choices are pretty self-explanatory. I mean, they're the most basic choices out there. Top five picks. So for the two guards for the East, it was pretty close between Bradley Beal and Jaylen Brown. I chose Bradley Beal for a number of reasons. Number one, he's leading the NBA in scoring right now. I think he's averaging 34 to 35 points a game, which is great. And then I can see the argument as to why people would choose Jaylen Brown, honestly. He's a great player, but I honestly think he's just not as good as Bradley Beal. So that's my honest opinion on it.
Yeah, I have pretty similar predictions to you as well. I think my West, I think I have the same front court for both of them. I do for the East, I have Kevin Durant, Giannis, and Embiid as my front court. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. For my back court, I do have Kyrie Irving and Jaylen Brown. I think pretty much I did, for me, I also was pretty much, very, decided between Beal and Brown. I'll explain later. For my West, I had LeBron, Kawhi, and Nikola Jokic as my front court. My backcourt, I had Damian Lillard and Steph Curry. Now, for the main reason why, I had Dame, but I think Luka will definitely win it, mainly because given the fact that 50% of it is going to the All-Star voting and 25% goes to the media, who, of course, have been, still building up that fact that Luka might win MVP this year. And pretty much his team, I don't think he's going to win it, given the fact the team kind of sucks and that he's pretty much putting empty stats up right now. In a way, because Dame is doing pretty well. His team is once again hurt. CJ McCollum, Jusuf Nurkic are pretty much out, and he's having some good games. Of course, yesterday he had pretty much kind of willed his team to beat the Chicago Bulls, and that's pretty much kind of like All-Star material. Steph Curry, what can you be said? The Warriors the team itself, they're not a very good team. Like Kelly Oubre sucks. Draymond Green is still not exactly the offensive capacity guy we were all hoping for. James Wiseman's still a rookie, and Andrew Wiggins. He's doing much better, but he's still you still don't know about him. So Steph Curry, he had 62 points that one night. He's still doing very well for the team, so I think he'll be a starter. And then for the front court, Jokic and LeBron, I think they're pretty self-explanatory. Jokic, he's having an MVP year. Of course, he can look at all his passes and stuff. And also, he's been showing a little more athleticism recently. But yeah, I think the last spot, the Kawhi Leonard spot, I think you could also make a position for Paul George because I feel like the Clippers, not many of us are talking about them, but both Leonard and PG kind of have very similar stats. I think maybe we can argue that PG has much better stats, but given the fact that George, his fan base kind of deteriorated after his performances in the playoff last year, and given the fact that Kawhi, he had such a high fan base, after the Toronto win, I think he'll probably get it in. And then the front court, I think the first three I can't really compare who you might put as a fourth guy, but the back court, I think people are against Kyrie Irving just because he sat out those 8 games, but he had a good start to the year, and he's been playing really well ever since he came back. And then Jaylen Brown. Of course, Tatum did not play that stretch of COVID and stuff, and Jaylen Brown had almost 27 points and pretty much kept Boston, afloat. That's actually really impressive and stuff. And, Bradley Beal, in a way, I like him. I think he's definitely an all-star starter and definitely has potential given the fact that, yes, he's part of the worst team in the NBA right now. Trae Young last year was part of the worst team as well, but he became a starter. So I think he might get it in, but I'm going to go with Brown. And then speaking of Beal, he's putting up some very high numbers. He put 41 against the Houston Rockets. He put up another career high, another high points recently and lost. But do you think Bradley Beal should get traded? And if so, where do you think he should go?
I honestly think Bradley Beal should get traded. I think the term loyalty in the NBA has been ruined. I think loyalty doesn't mean anything anymore, like it meant in the 90s and the 80s and the early 2000s. Loyalty doesn't mean anything anymore. He's ruining his career because of loyalty. He said he wants to finish out his career in Washington. I don't see what good that'll do for his career. Now, honestly, if he does want to get traded, I won't see any team that wants him currently right now. That's in dire need of an all-star putting up 35 points a game. Realistically, if he were to go to another team, I could see him in a great fit with the Miami Heat. I think the Miami Heat would do really well with Bradley Beal. But other than that, I don't see any other team that really needs Bradley Beal right now or has a space for him in fact.
Yeah, in a way, same thing. I think loyalty at this point, like, of course, every league is different. Of course, NFL, they try, it's more like, owners kind of control, but in the NBA, it's more players. And I want to talk about that later on in this podcast. But, like, at the same time, loyalty, of course, players believe whatever franchise they want to win. They want to win. Of course, James Harden, he was here for, like, 8 years in Houston, and then he dipped to Brooklyn in a pretty, I guess, kind of nasty way, I guess I would say. And then, of course, Toronto, they traded DeMar DeRozan without really telling him. Boston did it with Isaiah Thomas. So sometimes loyalty isn't exactly, right. Of course, I respect Bradley Beal for trying to stay in the situation and try to win. But I think at this point, it's might as well both sides benefit. With Beal, he's putting up a lot of empty stats and he kind of wills them to seem to win. And it's pretty much been masking their strong weaknesses, which is mainly their defense. Beal said it, a long time ago, they can't even guard a parked car. That's not exactly something you want. Like, that's not something you want to be proud of. So I think if Bradley Beal can leave, it'll allow Washington to, fully rebuild. And I mean, they're stuck with Russell Westbrook. So I think he's probably going to, live it out in Washington. He's not been great, but he'll probably live it out there. And I think Bradley Beal, I think Miami does seem like probably the best situation, maybe even Philadelphia. I don't think Philly wants to do it given, how good their team has been so far. But definitely for Miami. I mean, they've been ravaged with COVID throughout. Jimmy Butler finally returned to a pretty big performance against the Kings yesterday. Tyler Hero might be, out with COVID soon. So that could be something, yesterday apparently one of his family members tested positive. So he's been living with that person. So, I mean, you don't know exactly what the status for him is, but I would presume he'll be out for some time. Bam Adebayo, I mean, he's been having an okay year. Yes, he played 41 against the Nets, but Brooklyn's defense is so bad that any center can dominate that team. And then of course Kendrick Nunn, he's been pretty much sitting like the bubble. A lot of players aren't exactly themselves yet. And so I think them getting Bradley Beal gives them another offensive weapon, and has Miami in the same rank as Brooklyn, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and keeps them competitive overall. Because I don't think that Pat Riley, Eric Spoelstra, they don't want them the Heat to be considered a bubble fluke when they really weren't, and that will allow them to get some nice pieces in the attention.
Yeah, I honestly think the same. I think the Heat should really give up Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson. Now, here's the thing I have with Heat fans: they think that Tyler Hero is the second coming of Jesus or the second coming of Michael Jordan. He's not. He has great potential, but he's not. So I think it'd be really well for the Heat to give up Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero in the first few round picks or pick swaps for Bradley Beal. Because I think this would bode well for Russell Westbrook as well as Bradley Beal. Because here's my thing with Russell Westbrook, right? He plays well when he's the best player on his team. He can't function well when he has another ball-dominant player on his team, like we've seen with James Harden and Bradley Beal. I don't know if you remember, but February of 2020, James Harden was in a slump a month before the COVID shutdown. And Russell Westbrook dominated. He got like 28 and 7 for that entire month, so which is really good. So I think trading Bradley Beal away would really help Russell Westbrook, especially since there's no other ball-dominant player on the Wizards. So I think this will end the narrative that Russell Westbrook is declining. He'll go back to his old self regardless of his injury. So that's what I want to think.
Yeah, in a way too, Russ. I mean, he's best when he's the main ball handler. That's why he had his MVP year in OKC in 2017. The team was god awful. Yes, don't tell me Victor Oladipo, Domantas Sabonis on that team. Oladipo was still not exactly the same person. Yes, Sabonis was just a rookie. So I think that's obviously maybe Russ could be better, but he had like 163 points on 163 shots. That is very, very scary. And that's on a good way. So I am kind of nervous for that. And then about Tyler Hero's situation about the youth and stuff. See, I understand depth in a roster because in a way depth can be a very big influential factor. But there's a big three out there in New York. If you want to beat that team, you're going to have to get your own big three. You have to counter that big three. So that's the best way to take them down. Unless the only way depth can take down a big three is probably injuries, like we saw in 2019 with the finals. So that's pretty much the only main reason I can even think about it. But yeah, overall, this team needs help. Overall in a lot of places, but I hope to get the help.
If Miami does form this big three, I think that they'd have a very good chance of competing against the Nets. Because one thing Miami would have against Brooklyn would be defensive bench. You have Kelly Olynyk, you have Bam Adebayo, two very great defenders, and then you have Myers Leonard, who barely plays, but he's also a pretty good defender. So I think defense is one of the main things that would come out of Miami. If they did form the three. That's one thing they have against Brooklyn. But other than that, yeah, I pretty much agree with your takes. What do you think about Zach LaVine trade talks? Apparently, he wants to get out of the Bulls. So what do you think?
I mean, I guess I have my doubts about it because in a way, for me, is the entire Zach LaVine situation is he's playing with the Bulls, and I mean, he's been there for about 3 years. He finally has a new coach in Billy Donovan, a new management under Arthurus, the former Denver guy, and they've been having some good moments, but they've also been really bad, which I think a lot of us expected. And I think they're building a nice core around there with Kobe White, Laurie Markkinen, Wendell Carter Jr., Patrick Williams. So they have a good team that might, actually do well. However, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, Zach LaVine's contract ends next year. If I'm LaVine, I mean, I would look for a trade, I guess. I mean, if there's a nice trade for him to come out, like a good bench player he can play, I think it'll be fine if he can fit. But if I'm LaVine, I would probably just stay in Chicago and just risk it, run it out. You have 2 years of the team. Enjoy. You're in a big city like Chicago. Might as well enjoy it before you go to a contender and stuff. And overall, and I think people have floated the idea for a LaVine for Beal trade. That does really nothing, in my opinion. I think both situations aren't great. I mean, one, I guess you have Russ, and the other you have, they're not really, got not good positions overall. And I think best what them to do is just slowly, relax out. Let LaVine pretty much stay out there. Let him be. If he wants to come back, he can come back. If not, he can leave out and just, go somewhere else where he can play really good basketball and enjoy it. Because the thing is, LaVine, in my opinion, he's not really a star. He's more of a really good player on a really bad team in a way. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's honestly what I think. I think he should just wait out the 2 years. It's not like he's 32 or 33 or anything that his time's going to end soon. He's still a fairly young player with a lot of years left on his prime. So if I were Zach LaVine, I'd wait out a couple of years, see if Billy Donovan makes a big change in the Bulls roster. And if they do, and if I know they're not going to contend for the playoffs this year, but if they do contend for the playoffs next year, I think you should just wait it out and see the best case scenario. Now, the Beal for LaVine trade, it wouldn't work because you're just trading a good player to another bad team. Bradley Beal won't work out in Chicago, and Zach LaVine won't work out in Washington. It just won't work out, especially with the lack of defense in Washington. Both of them want to go with playoff contender teams. Neither of them are playoff contender teams, even with LaVine and Beal on the other team. So it just wouldn't work out in my honest opinion.
Yeah.
Adesh, do you want to move on to the next topic? Would you like to introduce it?
Yes, man. So we'll be talking about some Twitter topics. Of course, many of us know, Twitter, NBA Twitter is one of the best places to be as an NBA fan. I've always been there for every Twitter night. It's amazing to see everyone overreact to one of the smallest things out there. So I think one post that kind of went viral for the wrong reason was talking about influence in the NBA. Now, everyone knows there's really 5 players that influence the NBA a lot. Michael Jordan, of course, he kind of globalized the NBA. Of course, a lot of people, outside the United States began watching the NBA because of Jordan. We also The Last Dance and see what the impact he literally did for the entire world. But, his final season, them literally, all their games being sold out. Paris, Atlanta had to literally play their game in a football stadium because they didn't have enough fans to play in their basketball plays and stuff. And then we have Kobe Bryant, who kind of revolutionized the Mamba mentality way. He also was kind of like a mini Jordan in a way. He kind of helped globalize the entire NBA. China loved Kobe, which is quite – I don't want to get into too much, but they loved him. And, of course, Europe loved him a lot. So he kind of, revolutionized the game. And then you have Allen Iverson, of course, his style, the we can't the practice, meme and stuff. So it's been very, he's had a very nice, influence. He's made clothing a much more bigger brand in the NBA. That's why you have all these athletes, having some really nice fits. Some very creative fits as well, mainly due to Westbrook and stuff. But, yeah. And then the 2 players, of course, we all know is LeBron James and Stephen Curry. Curry's influence, in my opinion, of course, everyone knows is three-point shooting. Most players now these days, they don't want to, drive and try to dunk. They want to go for Curry shoot. They'll, it used to be Kobe. Now it's Steph, pretty much. And it's pretty much a new style. I think you look at, college basketball, youth basketball, you see everyone shooting threes and stuff. That's really, kudos to Curry and stuff. But, of course, the question thing everyone wants to know is, what do you think is really LeBron's, influence in the NBA? What do you think, Doug?
I think longevity. I don't think we've ever seen a player play with that kind of a long peak and long longevity that we've seen LeBron. LeBron came into the league in 2003 and has been dominating ever since. Now, we are seeing a steady decline of him, but definitely not the decline we're seeing in Russell Westbrook, where it's like, straight up shot and then right down. We're seeing more of a gradual decline of LeBron James. He's playing the least amount of minutes he's ever played in the season, around 31, I think, and then putting up 24 points a game. Now, that's still very, very impressive, but not the LeBron type of numbers we've seen. And I think the influence he brought onto the NBA was longevity. He's been playing for 18 years so far, and he's still putting up MVP caliber numbers. So I think for anyone not to say that he had no impact on the NBA is quite foolish. I think he did put an impact on the NBA. I think he revolutionized the idea of longevity in the NBA.
Yeah, also same thing as well, because, these players on these days, like Kobe Bryant, for example, yeah, he played 20 years, but, the Kobe Bryant we saw after year 17 was just a corpse, pretty much.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't want to mean that way, but yeah, he was pretty much not the same Kobe Bryant we saw. And then another thing I want to talk about is kind of way like LeBron. He kind of introduced the idea of being a free agent and being more of an athlete, because if you saw before LeBron, most of these athletes were just basketball players. Of course, Michael Jordan, when it came to politics and stuff, he never really got himself involved. Like LeBron, he has, so many businesses. He has more than an athlete, interrupted a new media company. He's kind of built up response. He's made, the NBA much more vocal about everything, which is really good for him. And then, of course, also financial literacy. He's kept players, players are much more, what the financial situation. He's been able to get everyone their massive contracts. Like, the role players are getting, so much money. Like, Tristan Thompson made $80 million. Tristan motherfucking Thompson made $80 million. So he's doing much better with that stuff and overall. And then another one I do want to say is also the free agent situation. Everyone knows super teams are along, much before, but mainly they were happening due to trades or drafting. LeBron's free agency pretty much told you players, if you want to win, you go wherever you want. So that's why LeBron, he had the entire big three in Miami. And then, of course, Kevin Durant with the OKC, the OKC to Golden State situation, and then Brooklyn. Kawhi with the Clippers. Kemba to the Boston Celtics. Pretty much all these players go to wherever they want. They don't get, it kind of ruin loyalty, but we all know loyalty is kind of overrated in my opinion. So, yeah. They're very influential, but yeah.
Yeah, I honestly think the same way, mainly because of longevity for me, because if you see Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, they played for 13 seasons. They both retired in 1980. Only ended up playing till 91. I know Magic Johnson actually retired because of age, but I honestly didn't see him playing any much longer than 91. Same thing with Larry Bird. I think he retired in 92, 93, around there. But yeah, he did revolutionize longevity. That's what he said with Kobe Bryant. After 2013, he wasn't the same. I think he was just more of a role player or a coach at that point, like UD. But yeah, that's what I honestly think. Now, moving on, I saw another Twitter, something trending on Twitter. You had 4 players: Kobe Bryant, Stephen Curry, Michael Jordan, LeBron James. If you had to erase one of those players' careers, like you've never heard of them again, who would you erase? Now, I'll go first. I personally think the late and great Kobe Bryant. Now, I think Kobe Bryant's an amazing player. He's a fantastic player. But when you compare his accomplishments to the rest, now I know he has 5 rings, a bunch of All-Star appearances, but Curry revolutionized the game. No one was taking as many three-pointers as him before 2015, before he came and revolutionized the game. Now, there were a couple players who came close, like Steve Nash and Ray Allen, but no one started chucking up threes with the distance and the amount of times he did before Stephen Curry. Michael Jordan globalized the NBA. He made the NBA what it is today. People in Europe, people in China, they all recognize Jordan as the logo for basketball. And LeBron James, you revolutionized longevity. So I honestly think it would be Kobe Bryant. What do you think of that?
I hate to say this, man, because, when I started watching the NBA, it was because of Kobe Bryant, the Los Angeles Lakers, but I kind of have to go with him as well because, like you said, Jordan, he kind of made the NBA a much bigger product than outside the United States. He made it more of an international product. Of course, everyone in China, Europe, Africa, India, they all know Jordan. Like, I had some cousins in India that, when they first started watching basketball, it was because of Michael Jordan. Not really anybody else. Curry, of course, he kind of influenced the game. Everyone out of these days, it's like a 30-foot shot is pretty much normal or in range. Like Curry, Damian Lillard pretty much are all doing this shot. And yeah, before the game, 3-pointers, there were people that doing that. Like Ray Allen was doing it, Reggie Miller was doing it, but nobody's, doing it as well as he did. I mean, Curry's literally already second, and he's only 32. So that shows you exactly how good of a 3-point, how important 3-point shot has become now these days. I mean, even LeBron James is doing it now these days. Yeah. Like, he kind of influenced his game pretty much with the fuck you 3 and stuff, so everyone loves it. And then, yeah, LeBron, of course, he kind of showed an athlete, how he can be much more than one. Longevity, of course, is the main one, of course, everyone knows about, but, being someone, just not sticking yourself to the on-court, try to be someone, a good person, a role model off the court as well. Of course, the idea of an athlete being an role model has always been controversial, of course. Charles Barkley himself has been against that, and that's kind of the way, too. And the final topic I want to talk about, of course, is Shaquille O'Neal. Now, everyone knows Shaq, one of the most dominant centers of all time. He's responsible for, I think, 4 rings. Recently gone to a beef with the 2 players in the Utah Jazz, Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. Your thoughts about that, man?
So, Shaq, who's a dominant center, I can see his hate towards not towards Rudy Gobert, but towards his contract. Now, we all know Rudy Gobert signed a $205 million contract with the Utah Jazz, which I think was somewhat smart for the Utah Jazz because Utah's a small type team. They need to be able to retain some of Rudy Gobert's value. And now he's a traditional center, like an 80s, 90s center. He cleans up around the rim. He gets a bunch of rebounds and blocks. He's not really a shooter. But I think it was smart for Utah to get to retain some of his value. Now I can see why Shaq is mad at that contract, but I wouldn't see why Shaq is mad at Rudy Gobert as a person. That's what he's making it seem. Constantly talking trash about Rudy Gobert, posting Photoshop images of Rudy Gobert. It's like Shaq has nothing better to do with the retirement, honestly. No, I think it should be blamed. I think TNT should be faulted for this because they're letting Shaq go on to their program and just talk a bunch of nonsense about Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. Now, with Donovan Mitchell, he said to Donovan Mitchell straight up, you were one of my favorite players to watch, but I don't think you have the potential to take the next step. Now, I don't know what went on in Shaq's mind when he said this, but this was ridiculous. He should not have said that. I think Donovan Mitchell will come out and prove that Shaq is a casual. I mean, they're somewhat proving that Shaq's takes don't make any sense. They're number one in the West right now. So that's what I honestly think. And I think Shaq should honestly just stop butting heads with current players. If anything, he should be healthy, but not butting heads and putting them down.
Yeah, kind of similar response to you as well. Because the thing is, of course, we all mean to the fact that Gobert got $200 million and stuff. But the issue is Utah. They're a very small market team. Small markets team, especially in the NBA, are pretty much as big a disadvantage overall with that fact. So if they want to keep these big players in the franchise, they're going to have to overpay them by a lot. And unfortunately, they had to do it with Mitchell and Gobert. Gobert, no meme. But yeah, they had to do it unfortunately with that. So overall, it was disappointing and stuff. I mean, I get it. Shaq was a clown. Gobert. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, they're centers. I guess you want to be the better, but I don't think Rudy cares about the fact that he's better than Shaq. I think he'll admit himself that he's not exactly the best. He's much worse than Shaq. Shaq's a legend and stuff. But the beef you have with Donovan Mitchell made really no sense at all. Like, okay, he's your best player, but why you want to tell him, hey, he sucks? Like, that just makes no sense at all. I mean, if you wanted it for motivation, I guess you could do it. But that just sounds so stupid in my opinion that, like, it made no sense. And, of course, the beef, there's some Instagram person had that beef where Mitchell dunked on Shaq and then some politician made some lie up. I don't know what it is. But, yeah, it's kind of annoying overall. And in my opinion, TNT does have a lot of issues overall with their basketball coverage, in my opinion. Like, of course, they give Shaq and Charles Barkley to be a big platform to spread their idiocy. Of course, Charles, he's been in some controversies, of course, with the entire situation about the fact that athletes should be vaccinated. They should be in front of the line of vaccinated. I don't think that's true, but that could be something you can talk about later on. And then, of course, the TNT announcers. I mean, I think it was Kevin Harlan's the main guy. He's not exactly a good person. He's had a very bad past. Reggie Miller is pretty ass. Chris Webber as well. And, it's just so disappointing because all these announcers are so bad and kind of ruined the NBA that I literally watch these games on mute. That's how bad it gets sometimes. But, yeah, overall, it is kind of disappointing. But, yeah.
I don't know if you remember in the past, but Shaq didn't fool. JaVale McGee was a big part of Shaq didn't fool. Like, a big part. And the slander towards I'm not a big fan of JaVale McGee myself. I personally think he does a lot of stupid stuff. But I don't think the slander was super necessary, especially from Shaq. Like, we all know Shaq is the most dominant center of all time, but there's no reason for him to currently shit on the current centers right now, whether that be JaVale McGee or Rudy Gobert. Now it got so bad to the point where Shaq's mom had to get involved and say, "Shaq, you need to stop bullying not Rudy Gobert."
JaVale McGee.
Yeah, I think JaVale McGee's mom got involved at one point. So Shaq's mom, if you're watching this, please tell your son Shaq stop slandering current players, and if not, he needs to just help him. Honestly, that's what I have to say. Yeah,
it is quite funny. I mean, I'll be honest, JaVale has done some very stupid stuff on the court. Let's be honest. I mean, out of his dunks, back when he was a Wizard, was really hilarious and stuff. But the fact that and Shaq been a fool. I love that show. It's really fun to see memes and shit. But I don't know exactly if the show is going on or not. But it was a good fun show. And then talking about memes and stuff. A new segment that we started, here in Buzzer Beater is that every month we wanted to start discussing our favorite, funny moments in the NBA during this month. Not you want to go first and discuss yours?
So my award for this month is the biggest flopper. Now, if you do watch the NBA and if you know who I am as a person, you already know who I'm going to say. LeBron James, the biggest flopper in the NBA. Runner-up would be Marcus Smart, easy. But the first place winner has to be LeBron James. Even with minor contact, the man goes flying 20 feet like he's in a Bollywood movie or something. Adash, who's your award for this month?
So my award goes to Cleveland Cavaliers centers. Now, everyone knows Cleveland. They've been racking up some, a lot of centers. They had Kevin Love and Tristan Thompson. Of course, Thompson leaves. They got Andre Drummond from the Pistons. Then they signed they traded for JaVale McGee. And then recently they got Jarrett Allen, the entire James Harden trade. Now, That's five. Like that's like four, and then maybe another center that they had in the roster. That's five big men. That's a lot of big men on your roster. And then, of course, Cleveland, they have Darius Garland as their point guard, but he's been dealing with injuries and stuff. That's been quite interesting. Colin Sexton as well, but he's more of a two guard. And then you had like one, I think it was a few weeks, I think on Wednesday or something like that. I saw JaVale McGee try to run point guard. Point JaVale. Now, that is great to watch for everybody except Cavs fans and Cavs coach JB Bickerstaff. You do not want JaVale McGee to be running point guard for your team. You need to get the ball out of him immediately, send him back to the paint, and run. So seeing what JaVale McGee did against the Celtics was pretty crazy, and I'm pretty, I couldn't stop laughing at this entire scene, of course. And then recently as well, Andre Drummond. He tried running point guard too a few times. I mean, and they pretty much was playing iso ball with one of the centers, and in the end resulted in an air ball. I guess that's fun to watch, but like if you're a team that wants to win, you shouldn't be having your centers play point guard. That is something really very dangerous. They really need to go. Yeah, five centers. Get rid of one of them for a point guard that can play while Garland recovers from his injury. But yeah, it's very very scary. But yeah,
I think JaVale McGee's very fortunate that he won't be presented on Shaqtin' a Fool, because that would be free real estate if Shaqtin' a Fool was still going on. Any other final comments today?
Nothing much, man. But hey, let's talk about our game previews for next week. Of course, next week we have two big games, I would say, coming up in the NBA. The first one, of course, I think this is a game that a lot of us fans will be looking forward to. Clippers Nets on Tuesday at Barclays. And then, of course, the one on Thursday, Nuggets Lakers. LA finally returns back home from LA, from the entire East Coast road trip. Any thoughts on both those games, man?
So for Clippers Nets, frankly, I think it'll go to overtime I think it'll go to overtime. And I have the Nets coming out on top by a couple, maybe 2 or 4 points in overtime. Because honestly, the Nets their chemistry has been getting better and better every single time they play. I mean, I've seen Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and James Harden all happy at the same time while playing. And now seeing James Harden and Kyrie Irving happy while they're playing is such a rare sight. And the 8 years I've seen James Harden play in Houston, I've rarely seen him smiling and being happy on the court. Same thing with Kyrie Irving. I've barely seen him happy in Boston. I've barely seen him happy in Cleveland. Now, a picture surfaced on Twitter of them both hugging each other, just smiling. Now, I think their chemistry is doing amazing. But their Achilles heel is defense. Now, they recently signed Iman Shumpert, who's a great perimeter defender, great wing defender, and he can do well in the post as well. I don't think he'll play in this upcoming week because of COVID regulations, but if he does, I think he'll be a great plus. Now with the Clippers, they have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Now, before this season, I didn't think Kawhi Leonard could have an inconsistent season. Now that's obviously not true. He's been pretty inconsistent this season. Paul George has been performing a bit better than he has. Not much, but a bit better. But honestly, I think I have the Nets coming out by a couple points in overtime. And that's what you think.
Yeah, in my opinion, I mean, this will be a good game, I think, for like a lot of fans. I haven't seen the Clippers since their, opening night win over the Lakers, and I've seen highlights of them, playing really good basketball, but I've yet to see them, live ever since, that game. And then Brooklyn, of course, we've all seen them live. They've won a lot of big games and stuff, but of course their defense is their main issue. It should be an interesting game because, of course, Kawhi and PG are two good defensive players going against Kevin Durant and James Harden. I do think that it'll be. I think the matchup looks good, but I do think Brooklyn will dominate this game. I can see the Clippers coming out flat and struggling a lot, and I think Brooklyn will be able to cash it in and play pretty well. I wouldn't be shocked if it's a blowout or I think close game. You really can expect anything, but if I had to make a prediction, I want to go Brooklyn in a blowout.
A blowout, okay.
Yeah, and of course, yeah, that should be a good one. We'll talk about it next week too, and you can talk about it. But yeah, and then of course the next game, Denver, LA. This should be, of course, a rematch of the Western Conference Finals from last year. Of course, Lakers, they don't have Dwight Howard, who was a big key player for them against the Nuggets last year when he kind of pretty much, he kind of took out Nikola Jokic and this stuff. And of course, Jamal Murray isn't the same player as he was in the bubble. And of course, Jeremy Grant. He's on the team anymore. He's on Detroit, where he played really well against LeBron and the Lakers. So what are your thoughts about this game, man?
So I think the Lakers honestly should win this game. They have a pretty easy schedule for the next couple of weeks. If I do see them losing, realistically, it'll be against his team. Because Nikola Jokic, I think he's second place for me in MVP running. Now, I honestly don't think he can carry the team by himself against a well-balanced Lakers team. And Jamal Murray hasn't been himself since the bubble, which I don't blame him. A lot of players have been struggling to find themselves after the bubble because of the depth perception in the bubble games and stuff like that. But I honestly think the Lakers will win. I mean, there's nothing much to say. I mean, if AD, he played really well against the Celtics. LeBron James has been playing pretty well as well, 25 points a game. AD has been he's been struggling a bit, not going to lie, but I think he found himself in the Celtics game. He's been putting up good numbers. Same thing with Trez. I think Trez is a great role player. Same with Dennis Schroeder. I do have some criticisms, but against the Denver Nuggets team, I think they should be able to pull off a W.
Yeah, I can see it too, man. But I think for me, I want to go with Denver in this one, just because whenever the Lakers come back from a big road trip, they kind of struggle in their first game home. And this team, a lot of the losses have been on at home. They lost to the Clippers opening night. They lost to the Spurs. I mean, it was like the third time they played the Spurs, and very soon they lost to the Warriors on MLK Day. So I think this team, they're probably going to fall flat in their first road trip. I think this is also a common theme last year as well. Well, they lost to Houston Rockets, the small ball Rockets, after a massive road trip. So I wouldn't be shocked if this team loses, but I mean, I think they're going to fall flat in this game. I would not be shocked if LeBron and AD have pretty bad games, and most of the roster will be struggling. I think Denver will play pretty well in this game, and I think Denver will blow it as well.
All right, pretty opposite takes for both teams. We'll see. We'll catch up about it next week. And actually, have any final notes before we end off the show?
I think it was a good show, man. Really looking forward to the games next week. Of course, Super Bowl is also the next week. A fun sports week, I would say, next week. So, yeah, looking forward, man.
Now, on that note, we'll be ending week 2 of Buzzer Beater. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a great day.
Thank you.